Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Pissarro, and it is my pleasure today to deliver the plenary speech for the Osaka Back to School Conference. I'm the ESL director of the English Language Center at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And today I want to take you on a walk about how education has been delivered in the past and what our expectations would be for the future in terms of designing curriculum for the new learners. So please join me and I will begin the presentation now. I hope you enjoy it. Please share your questions and then hold them until the end when we'll have time um, to talk to each other and to exchange any ideas about the presentation. Designing Master English Language courses is a topic that has developed in the past 10 years. Online instruction is constantly evolving and changing, but the most important thing is to stay in contact with learners and their expectations for their instructions and build our courses around their interests and real life problems. So I will begin by talking a little bit about what this presentation will include. Number one, I would like to talk a little bit about what some of the visionaries say about the future of education. And I want to bring some other fields into education. So I have chosen some quotes from psychology and neuroscience for you. Next, we will take a walk in teaching and learning in a historical plan. And then we'll talk a little bit about educational theory and how it changes with the change of thought. Next, I would like to talk about contrast and comparison between face-to-face and online course design. What are some of the similarities? What are the differences? And how this will help us build better online courses, especially for language learning. I want to show you a model that has been developed at the University of Maryland for reviewing the quality of online courses. I am Quality Matters certified, and this model is called the Quality Matters model. It can be applied to designing master courses, for teaching English as a second language or as a foreign language. And then I would like to do a short overview of language massive open online courses. So those courses are free for anyone to join. And most of them come from Europe and also from China. But I think this will be interesting to see how a larger course for teaching a language is designed, and so then we can scale it down to our own needs and our own classrooms. I would like to talk about what is the most successful theory and the newest theory in education today. I think it's very important to keep up with the theoretical framework that develops in order to, embed this in our teaching and our course design. And finally, I'll have just a short checklist about what the students' expectations are, in my opinion, and in my experience, and what teachers need to do in order to build course designs around the expectations of the students today. So let's begin. So the first thing is I want to give you a little bit of inspiration. Sometimes I feel that when we teach, we are teaching in our own classrooms, and sometimes we don't look forward to what's going on in the area of in other areas that affect education, such as psychology. So recently, I read a book by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga entitled "The Courage to Be Happy: Discover the Power of Positive Psychology and Choose Happiness Every Day." Sometimes I feel that education is devoid of happiness, so I thought that was a good start off point to bring some joy in our classrooms and the way we present material to our students. So, some of the things that I chose were actually the titles of chapters in that book, and I thought that it'll be interesting to start off just deconstructing a little bit what this book was about. The book was structured around the conversation between a philosopher and an educator, a young man that is starting in teaching, who had all these questions about how to manage his classroom and what the important blocks were for him to be successful in managing his classroom and delivering excellent instruction to his students. So the first one is that the most important thing is that the objective of education is self-reliance. So in this line of thoughts, teachers need to set up educational tasks in order to let learners be autonomous and learn on their own and feel confident at the end of this class or at the end of the semester. So I think it's very important to scaffold instructions so as to let students feel that they are accomplishing their goals, not just accomplishing the goals that teachers have set out for them. Another thing that I thought was interesting is that the second quote is, "If we had the same heart and life, we would be better teachers." So I think it's very important to stay close to the students and see how their lives may affect their learning. And sometimes we do forget that we work with human beings and we let our plan for the class take over instead of remembering that at the core we work with young people who are there to get an education from us. The classroom is a democratic nation is interesting because we as teachers have not been elected to be at the front of the classroom. So we need to allow for some of the processes in the class to happen naturally and, treat our students as a democratic nation, of a group of people that can actually govern themselves, that can make rules for themselves, and allow for a little bit of autonomy in our classes. Negate praise-based development. This is also very important. Sometimes teachers take sides or play favorites, and I think that might be also something that we should refrain from, train ourselves not to do, in order to avoid any conflicts that we create in the classroom. And finally, and most importantly, we should bear in mind that education is friendship and not just work or job. I think when we start off teaching, we really understand this, this way of teaching, that we are close to the students age-wise. And later on, as the generation gap increases, what happens sometimes is that we just treat our learning and teaching process as a job. And so I think we really need to keep ourselves inspired and be happy in our job, as well as make our students happy. So the next inspiration I thought would be interesting for us to talk about comes from the area of education, and someone called Dr. Mark Prensky was very important in inventing the concepts of digital natives and digital immigrants in a work called On the Horizon. So I wanted to just give you one brief thought from this work, which charts his idea about the future of education. So sometimes I feel that our students become more and more digital natives, whereas sometimes we can be in a role of a digital immigrant in the classroom. And that might be difficult to establish a relationship with our students in order to teach them. So Mark Prensky advises to forget about grades and academics, public versus private, and tweaks to the existing system. The future in education is not about technology or equal access or literacy or numeracy. It is about real world. And by real world, he means we need to include in education problems from the real world. And he continues on to say that this is something that our current education not only does not do, but it doesn't even try to. So we're not even there yet. So I think individually as teachers, we can include real life problems to make our instruction more engaging and bring the students on board. So adding more educational technology is not moving our children's education forward. If we're just doing the old things in new ways, like delivering content or researching, it is not going to make our education more quality or higher level. So Mark Prensky has a foundation called Better Their World, which actually focuses on those important skills that he thinks are important to develop in our students and also to embed in our course design. So the number one is effective thinking. Two is action, meaning what action can be taken in order to develop and solve the problems that the world faces. Number three is relationships, and the last one is accomplishment. So accomplishment means that we need to set up such educational opportunities for our students that will make them feel that they have done something positive in the world with an impact. So this is where the idea about empowerment teaching comes from. And this is something that we as a teaching community should seriously consider putting in our curriculum in order to engage students with real life problems. I think we should get away from the pre-specified curriculum that we currently use, such as selecting textbooks or some preset educational material to teach the whole semester. But Mark Prensky advises that we should rather plan for a process of empowering the students to become world-improving people. So I thought these two ideas would be the starting point of our talk today. Before we move on to how teaching and learning actually happens and take a brief historical timeline. So in the past, teaching was based on knowledge that comes from the gods. For example, going back to religion, the first students and teachers were actually the followers and the inspirational talkers and who were considered gods at the time. We can think of Jesus Christ, for example, in the Christian tradition. But the way learning happened was through repetition and chanting of the Holy Scripture or of the words of the gods, and also rote memorization. Even today, some religious followers do memorize the holy books of their religion, for example, the Bible or the Quran. So this is how teaching and learning started developing in the past. It was almost like a religious devotion to the master or to the god. Moving forward to the Middle Ages, learning happened through apprenticeship. So there were jobs that were important in the community, which worked on this principle of apprenticeship. So the masters were having students that were young, and they were teaching them through observation and repetition of a process to produce a product that is up to a certain standard or of perfection, which was determined by the master. So this is interesting also to remember how this happened in the past in order to see what we can embed in our course designs today. It might sound too far away from us, but actually they are little golden nuggets and crumbs we can take from how teaching and learning happened throughout this history. So next is the Renaissance. And the actually before that is the ancient Greek thought. So the philosophers of the ancient world in Greece and Rome and the rest of the world, China, Japan, and other countries, delivered knowledge to their students through questioning and discussing and disagreeing with each other. So the argument was very important among learned people. And again, the learning process happened through this mentor-student relationship, and a lot of reading. So next comes the 1800s, a big leap forward. So what happened there in educational context is that we have these mixed age classrooms. So in the 1800s, in some parts of the world, the teachers were teaching in front of all the students from the community. So what happened is that there was a lot of collaboration among the learners, and sometimes the older children were teaching the younger children. So that's another idea that we can take from that time and fast forward to our technology age, get this idea about community of learners and more advanced students working with less advanced students in the classroom. The next level would be to separate the students by a grade level and having all peers or students at the same age in one class. Unfortunately, this kind of education has some negative implications, such as treating the teacher as the only information giver or the sage on the stage, as well as the organization of the classroom, which was very static. And the number one important thing was discipline and following what the teacher says. So there was very little input from students or interaction. And in the last piece of the historical timeline, I want to talk a little bit about how education is conducted today, especially online, because I feel that with the current situation, even the health pandemic that we just experienced, that really put a lot of questions in the teachers' and students' heads and administrators. So the focus of education today is I-centered. So the learner is in the center of education and the process of learning. But we also have this fast-growing World Wide Web, and the internet is offering so much information that it kind of loses the learner inside this wealth of information. So the most important thing to kind of see is whether education, as throughout the history, actually will lead to career, or the way we set up education right now would be helpful for our students to find the career of their dreams, or to get a job, which is what teaching and learning should be about in the institutional context. Okay, so the next thing is to kind of run through the same exercise about teaching and learning, but take a theoretical overview of how this process happened, and what was knowledge considered, and how did learning happen in education in our field, and also what did teachers do to make this happen in the classroom. So this slide will be just about the old methods of in education, and then towards the end I'll talk about the most current one, which is connectivism. So, as we all know, the oldest method for teaching is behaviorism. So, in it, knowledge was based on just facts that were outside of the learner, and learning happened through learners' likes and dislikes. So, if the learner liked something, then he was learning it, and if not, he or she was learning it, and if not, then he was not. So, teachers in those periods in this period had to set up rewards that will incentivize learners to learn in one direction, and put barriers to other pathways which will not learn to real knowledge, according to the teachers. The second theoretical perspective is cognitivism. In it, knowledge was considered facts, theories, and opinions, and learning happened through the learner's experience, so through practice, trial and error, and something that came from what the learner already knew to what the learner was exposed to. So during this theoretical paradigm, teachers had to select the content and then determine very narrow path to exit, meaning to meet the student learning outcomes. So the third and last one from the old paradigm, educational paradigms, is constructivism. And in this paradigm, knowledge was considered in the learner's mind, and learning happened through meaning making of what the learner knew with what the learner was exposed to, and how he or she incorporated this knowledge in her learning. Teachers should, in this theoretical perspective, constructivism, teachers were supposed to select very rich experiences for the learners, and content, and also more than one path was possible to reach the student learning outcomes. So just a brief theoretical overview of what were some of the theories popular in education, and how this affected course design is by what teachers should do. So fast forward to today, some of the important things to think about when we design courses for language teaching is how the face-to-face English language teaching courses do or do not translate well into the online environment for the same teaching skill, which is languages. So there are a couple of elements that I'll compare from the face-to-face environment, and then we'll see how they translate into the online English language teaching environment. So the first thing to remember is that in the face-to-face classes, we usually front load our curriculum, and we begin with goals that we set for our students to achieve. For example, we can take a look at the European Framework of Reference for Language Teaching and the I can statements. So this is a 6-level system that specifies what the student learning outcomes should be for the different levels from beginning to native-like for languages. So usually this is done from ministries of education or from the European Union in this case, and different commissions. So it's a community of experts that sit down and come up with those statements. In online environment, what happens is that we use the process of backward design engineering in order to set student learning outcomes that we will achieve during the semester as end of semester competencies. So we begin from what we want learners to achieve at the end of the semester, and then we build a pathway to, or pathways to those student learning outcomes. So it's kind of like, think of it as the reverse process from face-to-face to the online environment. So the second thing is that in face-to-face classes, we are tied to 50 or 75-minute class period. And so in this time, we have this face-to-face connection with our students and the peers, and also we can organize group activities that are actually moderated by us in real time. Whereas in online environment, we are not tied to this time period, so we can leave those activities for a longer time, for example, for a week, with instructions about how we want those activities to be completed, whether they should be individual or pair group or just group activities. Also, number 3 for the face-to-face is we need to set up some assessments that are done as formative or summative assessments, and those are done mostly in class, sometimes as homework outside of class, whereas in the online, most of the work, all of the work is done outside of class. Feedback is another important building block of face-to-face instruction, and that happens primarily synchronously. For example, sometimes in office hours, before or after the class, and of course during class time. Whereas the connection between the teacher and the student in an online environment is usually done asynchronously, so we don't have the students in front of us. However, we can make an effort to have our virtual office hours, or even go to a more interesting format of a group consultation. So the time frame is usually around 30 minutes. So that way students can feel that they can ask any questions they want during that time. So what are the interesting things that we need to think about in terms of what role we play and how we can set up successful experiences for our students? I'll just go to the yellow part, or the role of the teacher in online classes. So basically, we function as the mastermind and someone who will moderate the course and someone who will look at students' products and grade them. We are responsible for how to sequence the information and to present it clearly. Usually information is presented in weekly modules. For example, if you have 15 weeks, for each week there is a module with something that we have set up for the students. And it's important that we present this very clearly so it's easy for the students to get to the information they need. And of course, we can also base our curriculum on projects, or we could set discussions per week, and we can also require individual posts. Um, the assessment can be more holistic, or it can be, for example, a set of words for a discussion, so students know clearly what they need to do to pass the course. And then the engagement component is very interesting, so we should plan for peer-to-peer feedback and discussions, and having just like a space where students can freely communicate with each other. For example, a class wiki. And of course, we should support our students in an online environment, because we know language teaching is a social activity. So we should never forget that they just really need this face and this knowledge, from the teacher on a regular basis. And that should be clear from the get-go as well. One of the models that has been developed in the US by the University of Maryland is called the Quality Matters model. And here I have just shared the higher education course design rubric. So there are rules that specify what an online course, a quality online course, should look like. And it includes 8 elements, from giving an overview of the course and introducing students to the content and the expectations, through the learning objectives, what kind of assessments would be embedded, and how will knowledge be measured, what kind of materials we'll be using during the whole duration of the course, what kind of activities the students would be engaging in, and what kind of interactions they'll have with each other and the teacher. And then, of course, what kind of technology is needed to participate successfully in the course, and how can the learners be supported. So those are the 8 main standards we need to think about when we create successful online experiences for our language learners. One brief example I wanted to give is about designing language massive open online courses. And this started in 2007, and nowadays there are 197 language courses. So it's still, this field is still developing, but it's growing. So some of the topics that language courses explore in this literature review that was conducted by Martin Monnier and Lee was focusing on motivation and what kind of experiences will bring motivation to the learner. So when we design courses, we need to think about what are some interesting things that will keep the student motivated. For example, embedding things that are personal to them, and that they would be interested in talking back, especially about language learning. And then another interesting thing was the instructional design and how it affects learning. So that's another thing, is like not to go to repeat the same design every week, because it can be demotivating to our learners. And plan for social learning in our classes, because language learning cannot be just learned by videos or grammar drills. That students need to actually participate with each other and the teacher regularly. And if you had signed up for any MOOC course, which is Massive Open Online Course, you will see that they actually have a little box in the upper right corner which explains what the gist of this course is, such as the length of the course, the effort that is needed per week, which is important, the cost, if there is any cost, which institution offers it, what subject it is, and what level it is. So that is actually an interesting thing we can embed in also in our own course design, especially the effort part. because teachers sometimes forget that students have other responsibilities and they think that that's the course, their course is the most important one in the students' learning. But sometimes it may not be the case. So we should be realistic with how many hours actually this course will take. And some do's that come from the things that we should follow is to take the time to introduce ourselves in a video. This brings more personality to our course, and also explain the description, the goal, the topics, and also establish credibility. We can introduce our institution, we can introduce ourselves and our experience, and of course, what course of study the students should expect. And then another interesting thing we can do is we can embed activities that are close to the students and interesting, such as trends, current trends in different areas, fields, which might pique student interest. We can invite guests, and we can just embed international perspectives, because of course language learners come from a different culture and they do know another language. So we can also plan for those kinds of embedded activities and interactivities. And finally, we should also think about the student buy-in. Why are those students that we have in our classes taking our class? And establish some personal benefit for them in order to incentivize them to work with us and with their classmates to reach those student learning outcomes that we have set out for them and for ourselves, of course. So the last thing I want to talk a little bit about is what is this educational theory that is becoming more popular today. And it's interesting because it comes from the world of artificial intelligence, or teaching robots how to learn. So the theory is called connectivism, and it describes the learning process as something that follows this cycle. So there is a phenomenon out there, scientists study that phenomenon, then scientists debate among each other, they produce content, and then we, as teachers, digest this content and present it to the learner. So instead of following this process, what connectivism suggests is that learners can actually become content generators and not just content consumers. There's a wealth of information today, and we should put our learners at the same level as researchers, because this is how applied research is born. The work with the teachers and the students together, and the classroom and the struggles that we experience together. And we also need to plan for that. So the educational system should follow and should recognize that learners are different and give them the opportunity to show us who they are through the way they learn and what they bring to the classroom. And connectivism is considering and is postulating that knowledge is not something static, but it's constantly changing and getting obsolete. So it's very dynamic, and it happens in a network between the learner and all the agents around him or her. So learning as a process is just exploring this network and the pattern. So it's a pattern recognition. And I think this is very important because sometimes we feel that there is a right or wrong answer. Sometimes knowledge comes in just the process of learning and struggling with the material. Connectivism also recognizes that learning happens at three levels: the neural level, the conceptual level, and the external level. The neural level has to do with biological synapses and how we learn as human beings by doing the same thing and learning more and more every time we practice that. The conceptual level means that we have our individual ideas, thoughts, and concepts. So learning happens when those ideas that we have meet ideas that we don't quite know yet. So this is how learning happens. And the external level of Connectivism acknowledges that learning happens in a social network, in a social environment on the internet with each other, communication with each other, and anything we come in contact with, such as the electronic books nowadays, and of course the World Wide Web, as well as our cell phones. So the idea is that today the learners are networked individualists, and we should acknowledge this and embed this in our course designs. There is a new theory also called design for learning. And this also acknowledges that we need to open up our education, our classrooms, in order to bring the pedagogical practices into this realm of sharing and discussing with each other, and learning this way. So the idea is that teachers cannot design the learners' experiences. We can just design for learning to happen. But actually, the learning will happen by the individual learners' steps to grapple with the material in combination with their physical and digital surroundings. And the learning process includes what students, teachers, and other agents might do after the original design goes live. So things happen after we have designed the course, because we work in collaboration with the student in order to make learning happen for them. So what should we do after learning about the theories and learning about examples from the world of MOOCs? So I think it's important to see what students see when they come to our courses first, and in order to reach them, we need to see what their worries and what their priorities are. So from my experience, I have understood that the number one thing that students worry about is what is the workload of this course, and what shall I do every week in order to pass the course? Or some students want to get an A. So is there anything fun that I can do? So what are the things that I can engage with the material or with my classmates? And also, how can I get help when I struggle? So those are some of the important questions that they have on the first day of class. So my suggestion to design master courses for language learning is to design for play, for interaction, engagement, and moderation, and then co-exploration. So the first thing is play. So learning as an adaptive online game or a social network of peers and mentors is what learning is to me nowadays, especially in an online environment. We should plan for formal and informal learning, and presenting opportunities to our students to research, question, summarize, and select information on their own, in order to get this engagement and informal learning before they actually can say that they know how to do something. Number two is interaction. We should plan for interaction, teacher to student and peer to peer, and we should give a lot of opportunities for the learner to interact with websites and articles and findings, and of course, real life problems. Engage. So the next thing is we should build these communities of learners between ourselves and between the students, and treat the class as a think tank to solve a problem in the real world around them. We should also plan for metacognition. So we should develop these metacognitive skills through requiring some self-reflection. What did you learn this week? Or what did you learn after the end of this project? Would be something that would be useful to reflect back on students' own learning. And then we should also, of course, build students' skills for language, um, and uh, also build our language instruction around what interests the students have, especially career interests, if they're taking language classes to get a promotion or to get a better paying job. And we, as teachers, should be a guide and a moderator for our students' learning experiences. We should act as a discipline guide on the side and someone who is uh, helping students to navigate the chaos of information that the online environment offers and to facilitate those knowledge explorations together with our students. So, co exploring is also valuable in language learning, and we should embed this in our course designs. So, that's the end of my presentation, and I would welcome any questions. Thank you so much for listening.